Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
Coming up on the Payoff, if you're driving down the road or if you are in some kind of funk wherever you are, whether you're driving down the road or at home or listening to this at your desk, if you need a shot in the arm, this is the podcast for you. Kevin E., we'll call him, is a coach in life, and he felt like a coach for me today, and hopefully he will for you guys. He's been sober more than 10 years. His journey in recovery, part of it has been relapse, and his story around that is inspirational, how it happened, how he recovered from it. His family is a big deal here in Central Texas, and we get into that a little bit. Some of their connections go all the way up, as high as you can go. And some of those connections got Kevin out of trouble for a long time. And eventually you can't run from this thing anymore, as a lot of us know. And this is a great friend of mine. He has a great story, and I think it'll be a great time for you if you listen, or if you have somebody in your life. If you need help with addiction, if you have somebody in your life who needs help with addiction, this is for you. All right. But first, a gift for you, Kevin Souza. If people know me well, they definitely have heard me bring you up.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. You've given me really good guidance over the course of my life. It was so good, actually. I stopped using it. It was so good, I figured I'd stop asking, like a good alcoholic.
Exactly.
So I want to start with you. When was the first time you had a drink?
Wow. First time would have been probably in the 6th grade. I was at a wedding reception. I believe it was good old West Fraternal out in West. And of course they had
Texas.
West Texas, and
which is a city in Texas, not West Texas.
West, the city of West.
Okay.
Good old country wedding, and I was at that age where girls were wanting to dance, and I wasn't that confident in my dance, and somehow a plastic cup ended up in my hand. Took a drink, probably took another, and then I became the best dancer in my mind. So immediately I connected drink, no fear, drink, good dancer, drink, girls likey. And so it kind of, I was a duck before the drink. And then when I took a drink, I became an eagle. And so that disease of perception began that early on.
Were you exposed to alcoholism in your family or anything? Is it in your family history, your family origin?
I believe the first time I heard the actual word alcoholic was in reference to my mom's, my grandmother on my mom's side, her husband, who I never met. All I knew about him was cool. He worked for the CIA. I heard that. But he was a raging alcoholic and how bad he treated Granny. We never met. That was my first exposure to the word alcoholic. That it was connected with bad and sick and mean. But other than that, no, my father, we had alcohol in our house. We had alcohol at social events, but nothing I ever connected to any type of alcoholism.
It's so weird. Like when I was a kid, my mom, the first time I heard alcoholic was she talked to me about my father, who was a functional alcoholic, but she would say, I believe looking back now, and this is just my perception of it, that there would be like a bad night, I think, and she would tell me the next morning, like, your father, needs to stop drinking. And as a kid, you just I couldn't make the connection. And looking back now, it's hard to even imagine what my mom was going through, all that. But yeah, it's weird when you hear about that as a kid.
One other connection, I remember when my grandfather moved. We built him a house after my grandmother passed away later in life. Out by it was a pool house. We converted to a place where he could live versus going to a home. And I remember I think he had drank a little too much on repeat occasions, and my dad really got onto it. And he cut it out. So I think I connected with, if it gets bad enough, just stop, right?
Yeah.
Given a sufficient reason, just stop. And so I never made that connection because, the alcoholic life seems like the normal one when we're in it. Like all the angst, all the anxiety, all the fear that's drowned away. That just seems like the normal life. And so,
What did it enable you to do? Like alcohol, like as a plus. You mentioned you were an eagle. How did it turn you into an eagle?
yeah, like I'm a pretty, as you know, outgoing person.
Yeah.
And so I don't need alcohol to be that way today. I just think early on, like there was this, I tell people all the time, like every time I would have an issue with drinking, they would say, why are you drinking? Just be yourself. In every different arena, I was a little bit version of a self that I thought people wanted me to be. So I was on stage performing the whole time. So over time, I felt the alcohol gave me that juice necessary to be the Kevin that they wanted me to be. My greatest fear was all those people being in the same room, and then what was I going to do, right? So I think that alcohol turned me into that wing because it gave me wings. It gave me wings later on. It kind of it helped me fly, I always say, and later on it kind of took away the sky in my life.
Yeah, I nailed me to fly, and I flew too close to the sun.
Yeah.
And then it was a wrap. You talked a little bit about, that juice you got from drinking. Before we started here, you mentioned that people that work for you, you say,
every
What do you say?
employee that I hire, they get to talk, and I let them know that you got to bring the juice. Whether you're coaching, you're a recruiter, and you got to bring the juice. And I tell them, if you're juiceful, you're useful. If you're juiceless, you're useless. And that's a cool thing to say at work. And what I found, the connection with recovery, my relationship with God, that's the juice that I have today.
That's the juice for me too.
And
Yeah.
it makes me useful, right? And when I don't have that juice, not drinking again, but when I'm away from the tools of recovery that have helped me, that give me that juice, when I'm away, I'm not as useful. I'm actually useless. So I have to fill up on that juice. And for me, that is a conscious contact, a daily connection with God and with the people, fellowship with the Spirit, and also the spirit of the fellowship, people in recovery.
You mentioned like it's so cool that, and it's so hard to get across to somebody who's coming in or to sobriety. The stuff you get from alcohol is the stuff you get from sobriety. The juice is you could still have that. I was saying the other night on a meeting, I used to lie about things that I'm able to do now. I would sit on a bar stool and lie about, whatever. I have this job, or I was with this girl, or whatever. And now I'm able to accomplish things in my life and show up for people. And it's just, the juice is authentic and it's real and it's natural if you tap into it.
Absolutely. And I know I'm being taped and on camera, so hate admitting this, but there were times in my life when the truth would have been sufficient and just as easy as telling a lie. But sometimes I would gravitate toward the lie or the embellishment because I wasn't comfortable being who I am, doing what I'm doing with whom I'm doing it with. And thankfully, recovery has given me that. It's a more than sufficient substitute for what alcohol provided.
I remember a sponsor of mine when I was living in a halfway house, he told me, and this made me feel so good, because he said, in passing, he'd been around for a while, but he said, I'll still blow up stories once in a while. He was talking about when he was spiritually unfit. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. Like, these people aren't saints. You can get sober, you could still make missteps, and you could talk about it.
Yeah.
All right, so back to you. Enough of me, back to you. You go into high school, you go from 6th grade on. How does it develop? How do you start to use alcohol?
I often reflect on this because you hear stories of someone had a really bad night, a really bad weekend, and all their world blew up, and they either were incarcerated and got in the program. At 6th grade, I didn't drink progressively. Like, it was off and on at weddings, in high school, did not progress. Because I was actively involved in sports, I was a valedictorian, so I was.
So in high school, you kind of kept it.
I was into my academics. I was into athletics. I grew up with a great family. Yes, they were divorced. Has nothing to do with my alcoholism, but I grew up in a great family. I didn't want for anything. I think, looking back, noticed in high school, in probably my senior year, wasn't really a fulfilling athletic year, and so on the weekends we'd go to Waco and and drink and cruise the valley. And so that just seemed like the normal thing to do. Occasionally it was a fist fight. Occasionally there was a wrecked vehicle, but thank you, Dad. He would just write a check and I would, get a new vehicle and get out of trouble. And that, I didn't realize at the time, but pushing that bottom, it had nothing to do with my external circumstances, but the internal condition of alcoholism, it kept pushing the bottom that I needed to turn it around. And so I drank off and on in high school. College, I was valedictorian, so I had a 4.0 my fall semester and doing all the right things. Broke up with the old high school girlfriend, discovered what pledging a fraternity was all about, and it was off to the races. So my end of my freshman year, I really got into my research and development on excessive drinking. Yeah, I really did.
So you mentioned about your family and your father being able to bail you out of trouble. Mm-hmm. This has nothing to do with our family circumstances, but because I don't think they know any better. But like you said, that bottom keeps getting pushed off and pushed off. Was there a sense of not entitlement, but you're unbeatable?
Yes, there was. So for both my brother and I, my father had money, influence, and so we would get in trouble. And
people knew who you were around.
Knew who we were. There was district judges that deer hunted on the land, and so they would give great counsel and advice, and I would see that. Later on in life, my dad's connection with it was the president at the time, and I'd see my brother get out of trouble, and so yeah, I always associate
of the United States.
Yes, and so I would see okay around all these people, and I think it was less to do with who they were, but my dad just had an abundance of love, and he thought he was doing the right thing. I've done the same thing with family, and think that bailing them out or removing a consequence is actually helping. They'll learn the lesson, and that's a rational response. The reality is we're not dealing with the disease of rationality, and so yeah, there was a sense of entitlement, sense of the rules don't apply. I can admit that, and I'm happy to report that that's not the case today.
That's not the case today. You talk about people don't know how to deal with this. There's no playbook for this for the family or for the person that's the victim to this, or the person that's the alcoholic, not necessarily a victim, but that's why this is kind of cool, because people listen to this who aren't alcoholic, but they don't know what to do with their kids.
Yeah.
And it's just good to give people a window inside of our experience, strength, and hope, right? Because your dad got you out of a lot of trouble, and it didn't make you any better.
No. I would argue worse. At the time, I'm sure I was extremely grateful and lucky. Man, I got out of trouble that time. Knowing what I know about recovery today, and for anyone listening, I think that you got to love them enough to let them walk through the consequences. You have to love them enough to learn from those mistakes. Removing the consequences with the drinking and the using such a small part of the disease, quite honestly, it puts off the recovery process. It did it for me personally.
What were some of the bigger consequences you had throughout college?
So wrecking tons of vehicles, getting in fights. So I had to get out of legal trouble with a fist fight here or there, and just a lot of vehicle wrecks. And then for me, over time, it was just my knower knows, and it was just that incredibly growing.
Your knower knows,
and just knowing that this is not how I want to live. Like when I realized that it wasn't just just in the wrong place, wrong time, and drinking and whatever. When I realized it was a problem, it was when I drank when I didn't want. I drank against my will. Like I don't want to live that way. I don't want to be that disappointment. The turning point for me when I got into recovery, is I had been on kind of a 3-day, just going out all the time. And I went home, I was so depressed, and how we do. Like, I don't want to live here anymore, just trying to play the emotional card. And my dad just shook his head and said, "You're the biggest disappointment in my life." And I thought, I had a brother that was having issues. I was never that kid. I was the good brother, and it just cut me to the core. I say this all the time. My turning point was essentially God gave me a glimpse in a very insane moment to have just enough sanity to see how my life was out of control, and something had to be different. And so I cried out for help, not specifically to anyone, but just help. And then I entered treatment 2 days later, and then here I am on the couch with Payoff with Pete today.
I promise it gets better. I promise.
But the crazy thing about the disease, it was bad enough 10, 20, 50 times before that moment. It was bad enough if you're outside looking in saying, God, Kevin, you got everything going for you. All these people who love and care about you. It's time to change. And the reality is, I won't sing the song, but I was dying inside, and no one knew it but me. And so it was just eating away at any sense of strength to just turn it around on my own. And thankfully, I got to the end of, I got to my bottom internally, and cried out for help. And as I said, the substitute I have today for what alcohol gave me is abundantly, profoundly, so much better.
What were your relationships like with women in your drinking? I mean, how did you use alcohol to facilitate those relationships?
I didn't know we were going there today. As I mentioned, it started at an early age. Drink, good dancer.
Because for me, that was, and you know this just from working with me and in recovery, alcohol was my conduit to any sort of relationship with a woman.
Yes.
I didn't, my mom was extremely important to me in my upbringing, but that's about it. As far as women, I didn't have sisters. I didn't just know everything I learned about women were from guys who knew nothing about women.
That's well said.
I stole it from somebody else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say it was that great social lubricant we read about in recovery, that when I was with a girl, going out or a date, it was always drinking. So I associated that that confidence and that suave and debonair persona with we're drinking. I just had this thought when you were sharing that. I remember in treatment, they were doing our discharge program, make sure we're ready to go out into the real world. And I'm like on fire, and I got this down. Let's go, go, go. And they do a little exercise. And I remember Dr. Brown standing behind me and saying, okay, you're out, you're driving around, you're at the lake, great, and you get stopped. 2 females, extremely good looking. They're tan, they're this, they're that, and they want to have a drink. What do you do? And it hit me. It's like, I guess the pause said it all.
Oh, yeah.
Because she busted me. And it was like I had associated that acceptance and that sense of confidence as it relates to women with alcohol. And so I had to really overcome that.
It takes a long time to undo that. I mean, there's a guy who we see in recovery once in a while who says this program isn't so much about getting stuff as it is about getting rid of stuff in
Amen.
sobriety. I mean, I had to get rid of, still I'm unloading stuff, you know, the fear, the insecurity around women was so great when I got sober that it took me a long time. And I'm happy I waited. I mean, I remember one time I was talking to a guy about this who was sort of newly sober recently. I was probably 1.5 years, maybe 2 years sober. I was looking through my phone, and I was like, I don't have like one text with a female going on here where like something's happening. And I was like, am I never going to get this? Am I never going to get there? And you eventually do. And it's such a huge accomplishment. Alcohol is just such a huge lie that tells you all these things that obviously are not true. You know? So you are bottoming out, right? The moment your dad says you're a huge disappointment. And you go into treatment.
I go to treatment.
And what I want to get to part of your story is there's like a window of like a relapse in there.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important because a lot of people don't understand that that's kind of part of the deal sometimes. Yeah. So you get sober, but what do you start to do? What changes are you making in your life to sustain sobriety and to fill that? For me, it's just like I still have it, like that hole in our soul.
So what I learned, and I thought probably like a lot of people think that if you are an alcoholic, have an issue with drinking, you have a drinking problem. That drinking's your problem. That's what I believed. What I learned in recovery, drinking wasn't my problem. Drinking was my solution. So the root cause of my alcoholism is not I drink too much. It's selfishness and self-centeredness. So when I was in recovery and got out, my grandfather had got real old and real sick quick. And my dad had just been diagnosed with cancer. And so he was receiving radiation and chemotherapy. My grandpa was really sick. They lived real close. And so I moved in with my grandpa. And what helped me the most is I had to do things I was never equipped to do. bathe him, give him medicine, shower him,
This is early
serve
in
him,
sobriety?
early in sobriety. And so what it did was it forced me. I'd like to say I nobly got out of self. No, it forced me out of self to be of service. And what it did was, by getting out of self, it freed up just enough space for God's grace, his mercy, and purpose to work in and through me. And that was enough. Like, that was for 2 years. And, and then what happened was I was being of service, and that's a very important part of recovery, but I was kind of comfortably miserable. I talk about I had done just enough of the work, just enough of the steps to make the situation better, to make the pain of circumstance kind of be pushed back. But it hadn't been removed. It was just pushed back. And this disease is powerful, it's cunning, it's baffling, it's patient. And so while I was being of service and doing all the right things, and everyone's like, Kevin's doing so good, and I got my stuff back, and everything was great. But I didn't finish the work. I didn't finish the steps. And so slowly but surely, even in the rooms of recovery, my alcoholism grew worse. And I can say that now because looking back, I didn't know that. I thought, maybe I'm exceptionalism. Maybe I'm the exception. I've done just enough work. I'm not drinking. I'm going to work.
You get away from recovery?
Yeah.
So you're kind of like...
I'm going to meetings.
Okay.
I'm going to meetings. I'm elected GSR. I'm speaking at eloquent meetings. I'm sharing little tidbits, but I wasn't doing the work. And
What's the work?
God rewards honest effort, not wishful thinking. The work for my sobriety is the steps. I had to work the steps. And it was you mentioned it. And so it was growing in relationship with God and learning more. And I think that learning more is getting more. It was unlearning. It's not the things I didn't know that was killing me. It was the things that I swore were absolutely true that just ain't so. That was what was holding me back. So my grandfather passed away. I'll say this. My dad saying I was a disappointment and taking my grandpa. I may be fast forwarding too much, but I had the great privilege. The greatest sobriety's given me so many rewards. But I held my grandfather's hand as a hospice nurse is singing, when we've been there 10,000. She's singing Amazing Grace. I'm holding my grandpa's hand. He looks up at me. Pete, I cannot describe the pride, the love, the forgiveness, because I'd been taking care of him. They saw me as a disappointment then. I held his hand as he took his last breath on earth. And I did the same thing for my father 4 years after that. So he was in a hospital room, and he looked at me, and no matter how the road to get to recovery and to have this freedom from bondage, that look in my father's eyes is something no one can ever take away. It restored everything, and I owe that all to the program and to recovery. So. And
I would imagine that stays with you today, because you talked about, when we pull that card, the emotional card, like, I don't want to live here anymore, or I don't want to live anymore, or whatever, and it leads up to that moment where your dad says your disappointment. For me, like, I'm like in shambles as a person up to that moment. I don't have any more self-esteem.
Yes.
And what you just mentioned, those two instances, they naturally build that self-esteem. Like, by doing the right things, you build that self-esteem, I
always say, I tell sponsees I work with, if you want to increase your self-esteem, do esteemable things. It's really that simple.
And if you do things that aren't esteemable, like 2 nights ago, I was lying to my girlfriend, unestimable. And, I say it's not a major deal. It's a white lie, but I'm lying. And it's like, she calls me on it. I admit it. And you feel like SHIT.
Yeah.
And it's the next day, there's a hangover. It's hard to get out of bed almost. And you're just like, man, I feel like crap. And that, you stack enough of those chips on top of each other, and it's enough to get drunk.
Yeah.
And
that was that similar. You can lie to yourself in the program. I'm a sober member of this program, this fellowship. If I'm not finishing the work, if I'm not living an authentic life, it won't be a night out at the club. It won't be they showed up and offered you something. It's not the bears that chase us out of the woods. It's the mosquitoes. So it's over time, that little small lie, that embellishment. Over time, if you're an alcoholic, the disease is patient, and it will reach out and grab you when you're not ready. And so I had 4.5 years of sobriety, and I gave, I'm sure with what was a very eloquent and moving speech, I got my 4.5-year chip. And I had gotten in shape and got the job back and the vehicle back. So I left that meeting, and I went and met this little cute brunette at the Elite Cafe on the Circle. And she ordered, and ordered a pint of beer, and I said, I'll have a water.
Did you meet her on like a dating app? So she doesn't.
No. She does not know about my past.
Okay.
She was introduced to me. I was teaching at the time. My principal and his wife thought a lot of me, and they saw I took care of my grandfather. Right, I'm living the great life, 4 years sober, and she knew of me from middle school through UIL and athletics. I was a big deal, Pete. But,
you still are.
And so my
UIL is the Texas, basically the governing body over high school athletics, right, in Texas.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so she knew of me, so they introduced us, and we went out. I met her at Starbucks. We went out, but we were having our big first day at the Elite.
Sure.
So she orders a beer. I say water. She says, "You're not drinking?" "No, not tonight." Because I haven't been honest, right?
Yeah.
I went honest with her. I came back. Well, there was a beer there. She said, "I thought you might want one." I wish I could report that 4.5 years of even going to meetings and doing this, but not doing the work. I put up a big fight. No, I said thank you and drank it. And the worst thing happened to me that night. When I went home, I didn't get pulled over. When I went home, I didn't have a wreck. I met the girl, got the kiss, and I thought, maybe I'm not an alcoholic, right? There's a disease again. Maybe I'm different. Maybe I had a mental defense. I said no the first time. The next time they brought the beer, I didn't. And so what happened? Nothing bad happened. And so then in about 2 months of going out, it picked up.
So you were back out for 2 months?
Yeah, I was out for 5 months.
Okay.
And I met my sponsor today, and he said, "Hey, we miss you. Haven't been going to meetings and this, that, and the other." And I said, "Well."
So you met up with him?
Yeah, I met up with him, and I said,
Did you tell him you're drinking?
Yes, I said, I probably need to get back in there before people find out. I need to make an amends. And he said, "Oh, people know." And that crushed me because they all thought I was living that life. We think we got everyone at bay and no one knows. And so it was very humbling. And so I did the very not honorable thing. I went to a meeting, not my home group. I went to a meeting, and the funny thing was I woke up that night and I heard on the TV, USA, everybody with these parades, the city in city streets. And I thought, man, everybody's really excited about Kevin's coming back to the program. It was the night that we killed Bin Laden.
Okay.
And so that was on the news. It was playing that night.
So
and I
was
was like, wow,
2010.
I can't even I want to come back in and make this big
So
Kevin's
May
back.
2010.
Yeah,
right?
it was 2011.
11. Okay,
2011.
yeah,
It's
May
May
2000.
1st.
Yep,
May
yep.
1st.
Okay.
And so I went to a different meeting, and I'm sitting there, and it's the meeting where you give your name and you say your date. I'm like, oh, man. So I said my new date, and you're supposed to be so forgiving and non-judgmental in the program. Well, rest assured, it's not Wells People's Anonymous. So I said my date, and everybody looked, and I was like, just crushed. And I was like, I'm getting out of here. And there's a lady in the program, name is Anna, if I may say her name.
Yeah.
And
Anna's been a guest
She
here.
walked over to me and gave me the biggest hug and said, "Welcome home." And I was like, thank you. And so my journey began. And I remember I got my 6-month chip on round 2. And I was feeling really despondent about that. 6 months, I should have had 5 years. And my sponsor said, Bill Wilson, he only had 6 months when he started this whole thing. That's a pretty symbolic, significant amount of time. And you obviously are different. And so I just made the decision. I got as you know, at that time, hardcore, big book thumping, black belt sponsor. And it was what I needed.
Yeah.
It was more ego deflation. And we're going to do the work. And I had him before I went back out. And I thought he was going to, I told you so. And this, that, and the other. And he said, hey, obviously you learned some things. You did some things right. You have 4 years or 4.5 years. Let's do it right. Let's do it the whole way this time. And I did. And it's been, almost 11 years ago.
You mentioned ego deflation, right? And you've got a big personality. You come from a successful family. You're a successful guy. How have you been able to maintain that ego deflation? Wipe your mouth off.
All right. Thank you, Pete. I'm drooling all this good stuff here. What was the question?
So your ego deflation, because I want to. You mentioned your father, a relationship with the president. You're out there on this ranch. It's like Westwood out there. What do they call? What's that show?
Western White House. Well, Yellowstone.
Yeah, it's like Yellowstone. But yeah, Western White House, right? That's what they called it. You're out there, kind of say Crawford, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're
big city boy.
But the land that the president purchased for his, what would you call it, the Western White House, was from your family.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was.
So he's kind of living close to you. You're untouchable for certain situations when you're drinking. How do you deflate that ego on a daily basis? Because you're from a situation where you're in pretty good shape, you know?
I remember talking to someone, my whole life, it was, I used to think it was because of me. I learned life is sometimes in spite of me, but just everything you touch turned to gold, like this Midas effect of academics, athletics. I was just rolling.
Born on third base, thought I hit a triple.
Exactly.
I'd
like that. Yeah. And when I say ego deflation is not just I think less about me. I don't think about me so much. I've learned that my sobriety is not dependent upon anything I know about the program. It's all dependent on what I do in the program. And so I learned that I used to hear the phrase another bozo on the bus, or just another. And previously I would think, well, I don't subscribe to that theory. I need to be. And I've really the humility, the degree of selflessness that working the steps and going through recovery has granted me. I can't. It's almost like a selfless response to say, it's not anything that I've learned that I do or I've done to learn how to be more humble. It's by doing the work that God has empowered me with a degree of selflessness and service that's almost kind of uncomfortable to talk about. In the past, it wouldn't be uncomfortable to talk about. I'd say, well, I do this. It's nothing to do with me. It's I grow in relationship with my Creator each and every day by suiting up and showing up and realize that we all have a part to play that He assigns, and I do my best to carry that role. There's no one in my life, like this is probably a little uncomfortable. There's no one in my life, and that's intentional, that doesn't know that I have a involvement with recovery, because it's a very important part of my life.
You're sort of similar to myself in a sense where to get to know me is to know that I'm in recovery. Yeah. I don't walk up to you at HEB and hit you over the head with a big book, or I just have a conversation or I meet somebody. But if we're going to have a real conversation, it's going to come up, because as a guy said once, I heard him say at a meeting, when I'm at the 7-Eleven, I'm the guy in recovery. Like that's who I am. It needs to be that way. I need to be Dan who is sober, because that's who I need to be. That's who I am. Alcoholism and drugs completely encompass my whole life, right? So why recovery has to now?
Yeah.
Well, because I'm unhealthy otherwise.
The compartmentalization of my recovery the first time around, I believe wholeheartedly, led to me being in a situation that I went back out in, and I will never ever take that risk again. My wife, the crazy thing is, the brunette that night, that's my wife today. And so she knows as much of the program as people in the program, because it's an important part of our marriage. It's made our marriage better. People at work know, like you said, I don't beat them over the head. And that's not part of the interview process, but they either pick up on it or no. And the really cool thing is when some of these young people that I lead are struggling, or they know someone, they will bring them to me in a meaningful way. And I've had the privilege and honor of helping people in their own journey.
Like me.
Yeah. Well,
no, I want to kind of go back to what you said about meeting your wife. I had a situation, a couple, where I would be dating a woman and I would talk to you about it. And I remember I was like, I'm going to see this girl and I'm terrified and yada, yada. And you're like, yeah, like you're probably going to show up and she's going to just walk to the door and call you a huge loser. And they'll have a lot of people with the camera shouting, asshole, ass. That's not what happens, but that's how we catastrophize, right? And you really helped me through a couple relationships just to kind of navigate the waters, because I didn't have a clue. I did not know what to do. I didn't understand it. I hadn't experienced it. You shared your experience with me. But the one thing I want to ask you a tough question, because I used to resent you a little bit, and here's why. I used to say, Kevin got to drink when he met his wife. And he got to ease through all that stuff. I said, relationships and sobriety are hard. But what was it like when I can only imagine it was a lot harder when you had to get sober and you're dating this woman. How did you walk that tightrope?
There's a great line in our beautiful big book that says, our behavior will convince them more than our words. In my past life, I always relied on the power of my words, and so she saw when I had to tell her that I didn't even tell her while I was drinking the first month that I had been in recovery before. how awful is that?
That
So
sounds
I
about
was like,
right, though.
and she's an amazing person. I thought, am I going to lose her? But the sponsor's like, you got to be honest. So I was honest. And from day one, she's like, I need to take all the liquor out of our house, because she drinks, a glass of wine once every 2 years. And she has been the most supportive person in my recovery, because it allows me a place of refuge to come home, and there's no dishonesty in our home. So that acceptance, that support is what I needed. It kickstart my recovery and gave me the confidence over time to make sure I'm that way with everyone in my circle.
How do you stay that way? Because you through your work, you interact with a lot of human beings on a daily basis, which sometimes I will fear, but when I do it, it usually works out, right? But I have this, like you said, like I catastrophize, and sometimes I can even leave the person better than when, I encountered them. You do that a lot with your work. How do you continue to do that, and do you see how you do that? All like you work with younger people. How do you see the tenets of the program affecting their life?
It's amazing.
It
kind of comes
questions in one.
Full circle to how we started. If you're juiceful, you're useful. If you're juiceless, you're useless. So for me, I got to start that day right. Like, I do have a great honor to be able to be of service in a lot of different areas at work and outside of work, recovery. And so I'm always pouring into the lives of others, but you have to fill that cup. And so for me, it starts with a continued growing relationship with God for me, and able to share that. I like to introduce God to other people, and oftentimes words aren't necessary. And so it's through just that selfless act of service. God keeps putting those things in my path. Like I'm an old special ed teacher, and I remember when I came to work, my current employer, I was like, yeah, but I'm going to miss those kids. Well, it was 2 months later that we had this great partnership with this organization that provides athletic opportunities, no limitations.
And so it's on your jacket, so I'm going to say it. So D1, because I was about to get here.
Yeah. Sorry.
This is unbelievable. You guys, you mentioned you were a special ed teacher. Mm-hmm. You're sober now. You're running this place, and you connect with No Limitations, which gives special needs kids, right?
Yes.
The opportunity to play sports and be celebrated.
Amazing organization.
At your amazing facility, you guys hold this.
Here's how it started. So I'm on the job for a month, and I get hit on Facebook, tagged, or they shared my name. Someone was looking for a place to hold their prom. And this lady where I used to coach said, well, contact Kevin Engelbrecht at D1. I think they have room. And I'm like,
you guys have basically, it's like a giant warehouse that has been outfitted to be like this athletic palace.
And got state-of-the-art athletic facility, fully turf field. And so they came by, and they looked it over, and they brought some kids with them. They were in their wheelchairs, and they were like, not sure about prom. They'd found another spot, but we run a football league. And I was like, really? Where are you playing? And they were playing this great place the church had provided, but it was kind of a gym floor, and it wasn't D1, like this amazing state-of-the-art. I'm like, come on.
It's got a stadium dome feel to it when you walk in.
I remember at the time, that summer, I was running a softball camp, and I told the people working the camp that in the past I told the kids, we have filled your shelves with trophies, your closets with T-shirts. We're going to fill your heart up. So we brought the No Limitation athletes out there, and they get to be part of the camp. And from the adults to the kids, it was this amazing experience. We didn't want to end. So we started our first football season, and I said to the founder, what do you do after the regular season? They play like 4 weeks, and they said we quit playing. And I thought, you're juiceful, you're useful. So I said, we can do better than that. We had a Super Bowl, and that was
still do.
We had our 5th Super Bowl this year, and it gives us the opportunity for other organizations, because some of these kids are in wheelchairs or can't run. They buddy up and they partner, and they get to be of service. And so it's just, here's this theme again: as long as you are of service and free yourself of self, God can really work some really cool things in your life, in recovery and in service. And that's we're very privileged to do that. It's been amazing. It's been amazing.
It's absolutely amazing. I've had a chance to be a part of it and just see that the look in their eyes, and these kids. And I think about you've just shared with me before, like it's for you to be able to do that.
We give them T-shirts and medals at the end, and all the planning and all the sacrifice and moving stuff around is worth it. When you take that, medal and you put it over their heads, I'm telling you, you can see into their soul, not just their eyes. And they may have difficulty communicating, not in that moment. There is so much just love in that moment, and they feel. We forget it's for the kids. It's also for the parents. I had a big 6'4" guy wanted to talk to me. You run this place. I thought, who could complain on a day like today? And he was like, let me tell you something. You keep saying it's for the kids. Let me tell you something. When my kid was diagnosed with this disability, it shook my core. I didn't think I'd ever have an opportunity to do sports or coach or go to their stuff. And he has siblings that are, they don't have disability and non-disabled, and said they were jealous of him today. And he just broke down and said, you have no idea how much that means to this family. And so that's the really cool stuff that, you can flash it back, real rapid timeline. If without recovery, none of that's possible. Not without a daily commitment to growing in my relationship with God, none of that's possible.
Which has affected thousands, tens of thousands of people now from this program through. I mean, and that's just one of the many ways. When you have somebody that comes in to recovery and they ask you, or what would you tell them when they say, how do I just get a day? I'm just trying to get a day. What do I do, Kevin?
Well, first of all, I would say, are you done, right? You want to make sure you're done. And then I want to make sure that oftentimes we kind of wait for them to come to us, but once someone reaches out to me, then that's my responsibility, right? That when someone reaches out, I'm going to be there to help them. So we're gonna get to a meeting. If they depends on, are they vibrating in the moment? And they need detox. So it depends on the situation. So it may include detox or ER or whatever the situation may be. Oftentimes, treatment centers have done so much of the work today, and so they get to us a little bit later where they kind of are just trying to figure it out. So I'm going to sit down and spend some time with them, and we're going to see if they're done. We're going to see what they've tried and what they're willing to do now. If they are fully conceded that they don't have the answers, or they're alcoholic and they're looking for a new design for living and a way out, well, I'm gonna share with them my experience, my strength, and my hope. I'm not gonna lecture, not gonna look at their life. I'm just gonna share them. For me, and this is a program of attraction, kind of share what the program's done for me, and if they're willing to go in any length, I'm gonna walk them through the program step by step, and we're gonna get down to work, because it's a program of action. ACTION, action. Any choice to improve our nature. My nature was selfish and self-centeredness. So the program for me got me out of self, and I'm going to share that, and I'm going to help them kind of do the same thing.
Have there been times in your recovery outside of the relapse after 4.5 years where you felt disconnected?
So I remember the lockdown affected a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
In recovery, and I was fortunate. I was so. In my industry, that was a very scary time. So we were locked down. I was helping other facilities that just opened up, and I was going 100 miles an hour, drinking 4 to 6 Bang energy drinks a day, and going. And I'm not drinking, And then my sponsor's like, you need to, that's why you surround yourself. Stick with the winners. You surround yourself with people in recovery. And he's like, we need to. So I made a conscious decision that I wasn't finished with the work. I got 9 years of sobriety at the time, and I went back through the work again, and we went back through the steps, back through the work, and I learned that there was some amends I had to make that I hadn't made, and it was just this amazing process of a whole deeper level. There's always more. The spiritual beginning has a beginning, but it has no end, and so we just went further and deeper, and I'm eternally grateful to my sponsor for that. That was a tough time when you can't get the meetings. But
you have a real busy life to begin with, so yeah. You still do a good job of making it a priority. You're all over Texas and different parts of the country with this ever expanding.
Someone told me a long time ago, many meetings, many chances, few meetings, few chances, no meetings, no chance. And I don't want to communicate that just don't drink.
Don't tell this guy that
just
meeting
don't
makers
drink
make it.
and just go to meetings. No, there's a whole level of works. Because the reality is, meeting makers that just make meetings and don't work the full program, they drink again. They kill themselves again. That's just a fact. It's not my opinion. And so it's a very important part. And I make a conscious effort to be there because that's the locker room, right? That's the locker room at halftime. No matter what's going on before, what the score may be before, what lies ahead in the second half, that's the locker room, and that recharges and energizes. Very essential part. I make as many meetings as anyone. I just as I can. Very important part. But I'm telling you, I know from personal experience, if you don't finish the work, that alcoholism is out there waiting. It's doing push-ups and pull-ups and just waiting for you to think you got it, you're an exception, you're different, you don't need to finish the work. It's waiting. It was waiting for me. And, thankfully God and loving people in the program loved me back in. And I do all the work as it's prescribed today.
How did you allow yourself to be open to that criticism? Because I'm told that I struggle with that. Like, people kind of telling me exactly, you surround yourself with truth tellers, right? That's a lot of times what we get in recovery. How did you respond to that, or how did you become open to responding? Like when you get told, "Hey, you need to get your ass back to work."
Initially, I didn't respond. I reacted, and what I've discovered in recovery, the stimulus and the space involved, if it's here to here, stimulus reaction, not much space, that's not good. If I am spiritually connected, I'm doing the work, there's more space to respond to principles. In the response, that's a great thing. I did not respond great the first time, but I prayed about it, and the person that spoke truth into my life is someone that I respect incredibly a lot. And so I received it and got back to work. And the great thing about our recovery, it's great when times are great and you're this great person, but it's designed that we're, like I said earlier, this ain't Wells People Anonymous. So you're dealing with people that are, have issues. I'm one of them. And so it's a program that's designed when you kind of get off the beam. And I used to think that phrase in recovery, get off the beam, was like a balance beam, like you fall off. That's not that's not where it came from. It came from like the beam of like a beam of light, like that, like a beam that gets aircraft straightened. That's where the beam comes from. So we got away from that source and got away from that light that centers, and that was God for me. And so, I was pleased that I realized that the road of reconstruction had not been done. So we got back to work, and it has been amazing because, the world's crazy right now. I don't care if it's politics or the pandemic, all these different things. It was so incredibly stormy, and what I found was there's one ship. There's a couple of ships. There's three. Work with me on this, Pete. Like Columbus took 3 ships, the Nina, the Pina,
the Nina, the Pinta,
Santa Maria, to go to new places. And so I found 3 ships in the program: the fellowship, the relationship, and the sponsorship that they have just centered me and taken me to new places. And so, I didn't respond initially well, but I'm thankful that I knew, like, and trusted this individual. And got out of self and did the work, and I'm more centered and spiritually fit because of God and people than I have been in forever.
You walk into a room and you light it up, and you also lighten it up because you got a good sense of humor, and it doesn't appear like you take yourself too seriously, and that's hugely important. Before I let you go, there's one thing I want you to share, and we have the promises in our program, right? But you have like a different version of those promises for when somebody's drinking or using, right?
You remember this?
Yeah.
So the promises in our program, for me, that was the carrot stick, right? I heard that like a new freedom and a new happiness, and my whole outlook upon life would change. In recovery, you're thinking, man, that's awesome. I think it's important to remember why it's so hard. Why don't drink and go to meetings doesn't work. Because if it's that simple, we wouldn't need the program. If I could just don't drink no matter what, right? If I could just drink no matter what, I wouldn't go to AA. Why should I? Why should I? And so there's got to be more. But it's important to realize when I took that first drink, I drank one drink. My whole outlook upon life changed. Took another drink, a new feeling of happiness and peace. Take a couple of hydrocodones or Vicodin, and I would comprehend the word serenity and know peace. And then, 3 or 4 more, I'm buying rounds for the whole bar. My fear of people and economic insecurity left me. And then, on and on and on. Later on, I show you how my experience could benefit others. But it worked. That artificial spirituality, it was artificial, fueled by the alcohol. and it worked. It worked. That's what makes it so hard to give up. Is it worked? You know, when I drank, I felt like they loved me more. They appreciated me more. They were paying me the right amount of money, and I was significant. I mattered. No one's trying to get one over on me. Oftentimes, when you take that alcohol away, life's there, man. And so you have to have a substitute that's more than adequate. You have to one that's not artificial. So I'm happy to report today by working the program in my life, the promises have come true, but they're not artificial. They're not artificial. They are there, and they continue to be there as long as I do the work. Work equals reward.
Anything else?
No, I don't want you to ask me any more questions. I don't know. We've covered girls and family and everything else. So no, I just want to share with you the work you're doing is amazing, because what we cannot afford to do, it's an anonymous program that I'm part of. It's not a secret society. It was never designed to be. We have to be out there on the firing lines to say that, through alcohol or drugs, you're not a mistake.
Yeah.
You made some mistakes, right? And I think that's the beauty of the program is realizing you're not a mistake. You made some mistakes. And then it's kind of like I'm out here now, Pete. It's kind of like Statue of David, right? Ask how he made the statue. And he said all he did was kind of chip away what the things that David wasn't, and the statue appeared. The program's a lot like that. It kind of helps you to identify or to discover and discard the things that you're not, or God doesn't want you to be. Who we were when we were out there drinking and using was not who God designed us to be. And so it's getting rid of all that stuff. And the program has allowed me to do that through my relationship with God and meeting amazing people that are carrying this message to people who still suffer.
Well, yeah, and this whole thing kind of came on my radar, just this idea, just to give people, I don't think I've ever even talked about this, but I was at home, it was July, right? My parents were away. I was in the grips of alcoholism like crazy, right? Like my parents, I'm sure, thought 100 times about leaving me alone at their house. I'm in my 30s. I drink all the alcohol they have. I'm waking up in the morning. I'm shaking. I mean, that never had happened to me before, but it's happening. I'm that guy. And there was this, I think it was a Sports Century Classic. ESPN used to do those, and I loved them. I've always loved documentaries. And Dennis Eckersley, the relief pitcher, is sober. And he talked about his journey. And I remember watching this and crying, being like, I gotta get there. Like, it just always, and I must have watched it like 3 or 4 times, watching it crying. And no lie, like 3 or 4 times, only like a half hour. But I mean, those seeds along the way were planted by people that were out there. And I did have reflections of people or people, connections with people like you and a buddy of mine, Peter F., who had gotten sober. So I saw that working too. But I just think it's important for people like you to share your story so they can see you, living life like a loose vest today or a loose shirt, and that's kind of, you don't have to get drunk to feel that way.
Right. Sunlight of the Spirit.
All right. You're the sunlight of the Spirit today. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, my brother.
All right, Mike. Thanks so much for listening to The Payoff with Pete. Once again, I'm Pete Souza. And of course, we are part of the Rogue Media Network. All kinds of good podcasts you can find at roguemedianetwork.com. And of course, you can find this podcast and all those other ones wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, other spots like that.
This has been a Rogue Media podcast.